everyone, welcome to More Than a Title. I'm Aya and I'm here with Professor Heyman. Hey Professor Heyman, we're going to talk about children and how they perceive the social world. I want to start off with your origin story. What made you get into this research?
Yeah, so I've been at UCSD for quite a long time now, about 28 years, and I think I've been doing psychology research since I was a kid. I just was always fascinated with understanding people and social rules and people's preferences, and I did some experiments on my sister, not knowing anything about experiments, just trying to figure things out.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's awesome. And how did you become interested in topics like trust, deception, and moral reasoning?
Yeah, I mean, some of those specific topics I got into because of a cross-cultural collaboration I have with someone who was in our department who grew up in China, and he kind of connected me with some Chinese researchers, and they were studying some of those topics, and the more I learned about what they were doing, the more I wanted to get involved and learn more.
So what stuff were they doing? Do you have an example?
Well, a lot of stuff they were doing was on the topic of lying and deception, and just really cool studies of how children first learn to deceive, and sort of looking at cultural differences and when children deceive, all different kinds of motives why children deceive, like to protect someone's feelings, or to protect their group, or for self-interest, and just sort of thinking about those different motives was really interesting.
That's really interesting. What age do children start, deceiving?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say on the average it's about 2.5.
Oh, wow.
And so we look at, one of the things we look at is when children first learn how to deceive, and we have a game where they have to deceive an experimenter to win a prize. So that's one of the methods that we use, and we see when they can sort of win this game.
Ooh, that's really interesting. You do like a game. That's how you study children. You use games?
That's one of the ways we do. We have a whole bunch of different methods to look at lying, and some of the research is on looking at when children actually lie, and a lot of it is giving them scenarios about other people lying and asking them sort of, is that okay? Is that the good thing to do?
Ooh, and what finds did you see? Like, do they see? Do they agree with like lying?
Yeah, that's a great question. In general, children learn that lying is bad as young of an age, even before they really fully understand what lying is. They've heard lying is bad, and their parents and other people tell them lying is wrong. So they can tell you lying is wrong, but they're still figuring it out because there's a lot of advantages in lying, and they're trying to sort of figure out the social world. One of the cute things is that pretty young children, like preschool children, will lie, but they're very bad at knowing how to lie in a plausible way. So an example of one lie that I witnessed of a young child was drawing all over the walls at her house, and her mom saw her, went up to her and was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then she immediately blamed her sister for doing it, even though her mom had just seen her do it. So these are the kinds of things you see in development, not just learning to lie, but learning how to lie plausibly.
Yeah.
And then thinking about all the moral components with people telling you that lying is wrong, but at the same time getting messages. So many parents will tell their child lying is always wrong, never lie, but then they'll, if the child tells the truth when their aunt comes to visit, and the mom was like, "Oh, I'm so dreading this visit," and if the child tells the aunt, like, "My mom didn't want you to come," then the child will get in trouble for telling the truth. So it's a pretty complicated thing for children to learn, and that's ultimately what I'm interested in, is how children figure out the rules of the social world when no one really directly teaches you, and you get all this complicated, conflicting information. And I'd say that's been my deep interest throughout my career.
Do you guys use neuroscience, like imaging, or no?
Not in my research. No.
Not in your research. Okay. So, what questions about children thinking have still fascinated you till today?
Yeah. So almost all of them are around this thing of how children figure out the rules of the social world. And again, there's so many contradictions. Like, parents will say, never talk to strangers, but then if someone's friendly to their child at the supermarket, and the child doesn't talk to them, the parent might get upset with them. And I think parents often don't think about this, and in our culture we're often just like, you should just know when you talk to someone and when you don't. But how do kids figure this out? And so I look at a lot of the methods. Like, an example of a method we use, we're interested in how children learn about the social world through overheard conversation. So we have a method where children overhear a conversation that they don't think is part of the study. These are very young children, and as the study's about to start, the experimenter gets a call and has a brief cell phone conversation, and the child thinks it's right before it's going to start, and it was about another child they tested earlier, and they're like, oh, that child I tested earlier was so smart. Sorry, I don't have time to talk to you. We'll talk later, bye. And that was the whole manipulation. So then we look at how, and in that case we find that manipulation, when we talk about how smart another child is, that makes the child cheat more to win the game and the task, because they're like, oh, I want to be smart, and I want to get that praise. I want to be thought of as well. Yeah, so that's one of the fun manipulations we do.
So besides saying like, oh, this kid is like really smart, did you guys do another call where it's like this kid is not, or like, I don't know.
Yeah, so we have comparison in that particular study. I don't remember the comparison condition, but we always have like 2 phone calls, and one is the control condition where you want it to be neutral, where it's like, yeah, this room is really warm, or we just have something else. And so we do different kinds of comparison conditions, but we also look at, that kid was really nice, and that makes children share more under a lot of circumstances when they have the option of sharing like an extra sticker that pops up in the study. And so so that's fun to me, because I think in a lot of studies, children are sort of, it's called demand characteristics. They're kind of figuring out, what does the experimenter want me to say? So we really like it when the child really doesn't think it's at all part of the experiment, so that they're just responding how they would respond. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So through your research, how did you find, like, how do children think about honesty and deception at different ages in their lifetime?
They're starting to learn to lie around 2.5, and at that point it's more of a cognitive challenge, and it's actually related to, like, children learn to, around that age, the ones who have sophisticated cognitive skills, like something which we call theory of mind, which is basically the understanding that other people can think about the world in a way that's different than reality or from other people's minds, and these kind of, which is hard to know, like it's a super important thing when you're thinking about the social world, is that I can't see what's in your head, and yet, if I'm working with you, I kind of need to know, and if I make mistakes about that, that can be a problem. So that's one of the really deep issues of the field, is how you do that. But children who are good at that are also good at figuring out how to lie. But they're also being told lying is a bad thing to do, and so it's just a really interesting thing to how they figure that out. So that's just one example. We've done studies on cross-cultural differences in lying. In general, we see pretty similar rates of lying in when you compare across situations, except for when things are culturally relevant. So I'll give you a concrete example. In one study that we did comparing the U.S., not the U.S., this particular study we compared Canada and China. And we looked at children's lying to be modest. And modest is a very strong cultural value in China that's not a strong cultural value in Canada. And so we found in that case that children were much more likely to lie to be modest in China than in Canada. So that's an example of, usually we see very similar patterns, like lying to be polite and other kinds of things we look at, but when it's this sort of big cultural difference in the underlying value, then we see these kind of differences.
Then how would you define modesty?
So in this study, what we did was we had children clean up a classroom, and while a teacher was away, and then the teacher came back, it's like, wow, the classroom's clean, who did it? And the Canadian kids are all like, I did. But the Chinese kids, especially the older Chinese kids, wouldn't take credit even though they did it. So that's like one of the ways we look at modesty, is taking credit for your good deed.
Oh, that's really interesting, actually. How do children make inferences about others' traits or intentions?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting question, and we don't have all the answers yet. So intentions we know quite a bit about, and even babies, when they can barely talk, they're already making inferences about intentions. So there's a lot of studies suggesting that children are really interested in intentions, like things like one of their earliest words is often uh-oh, which is kind of like they're interested in accidents. And if you do something and they can tell it's an accident, they're much less likely to repeat it than if you do the same thing and you appear to be doing it intentionally. So even really young children before their second birthday are starting to think about, is this intentional or not, which I think is pretty cool. And then the trait stuff, I think we're learning our whole life. It's kind of like what's in your head is invisible, and we're trying to figure out, like, is this person trustworthy? And a lot of adults have so much trouble with this, right? Yeah. They trust the wrong people, and they're like, oh, they seem so nice. And so I just think that's one of the, you imagine as a child, and you just have so little history and background, and how do you figure out, maybe they say things that are really nice, but they're really rude to you. And so we're interested in these kind of conflicting cues, and how do kids make sense of it, and especially when children learn about traits in indirect ways based on, like overheard comments that they hear someone say about a kid. How would that will affect how they think about what someone's generally like? But it's also, one more thing I'll mention, it's also the case that even like 2-year-olds, some of their first words are good and bad, and a lot of the times when they're saying good and bad, they're applying it to people. So that suggests they're already thinking about like people in evaluative terms, like saying he's a bad boy. They'll say things like that even when they're just learning to talk. Yeah.
So they're applying labels at such an early age, huh?
Right, exactly.
That's really cool. So like, how might understanding early moral reasoning impact and change our approach to education?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that, part of what I want to do is get adults to see things in a more complex way. Because I think a lot of times when we become adults and we're like, I told you the rule, why don't you just follow the rule? And I think if you understand that children are getting all this conflicting information, it can really help you understand why it isn't as simple as the child following the rule. Because maybe you're a teacher and you said be nice, but maybe the kids who get most rewarded in class are the bullies and taking things away, and all the other kids, or the funny one who's disruptive in class. Maybe they're getting the most attention and getting the most social reward. And I think these things are important to talk to children about, because that's a lot of what they're trying to make sense of. A lot of school is really about the social stuff and really understanding how do you make sense of all these social situations and power dynamics and all these kinds of things. And I think the more sophisticated we are about what kind of messages they're getting, the more we can have good conversations to help them process things that bother them or that they're having trouble getting through, things like that.
Oh, honestly, like when you said that, it reminded me of like how teachers will give a lot of attention to like the misbehaving kids and think it's like a punishment, when it's like reinforcing the behavior because you're giving attention.
Absolutely. And children differ in how much, like some kids, if they get in trouble, it's like they're so ashamed of it, it's something they really want to avoid. But there are absolutely other children who are like, hey, any attention is good attention and I'm going to get it. And I think, yeah, exactly, for educators, if they have educators and parents and other people, if they have a simple model of, well, of course a child isn't, I've seen these people before where they're like, well, of course a child would never want to do anything that upsets an adult, but that's not true. Some children think it's incredibly funny to do things that get a big reaction. That's like they're motivated by that. And that's another thing I'm interested in, is motivation and what motivates people to have these different kinds of
reactions and behaviors.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm relating so much to this because I used to work with like children for an after school program, and it was a lot. I would notice a pattern where it's like some kids, if you give them attention, the behavior will increase, and then some kids they'll feel shame around it. Just
exactly.
Like reflecting what you said.
Exactly.
Really interesting. So then that brings me to the question of what misconceptions do adults have about children's social intelligence? Yeah.
I mean, how you define social intelligence can get a little complicated. People define it in different ways, but I think you get it both ways. Like some adults think children are too dumb to pick up on anything. Like a lot of adult conversations, adults will say all this stuff, and even about the kid or the kid's siblings, and assume they won't understand, they're too young. But that's a lot of what they're picking up on about what's being said. And then I also think that a lot of adults just assume children know things about how the world works because they know it. And it's hard to, this is one thing I'm interested in is cursive mind, this idea that once you know something, it's hard to even think about not knowing it anymore. And when you communicate with someone, that's one of the things that's hard about teaching, is because you know it, and you have to sort of, to teach someone, you have to mentally represent what is it like to not know it. And I think a lot of adults are saying things that should be they think would be obvious to children, but that children don't know. For example, for an adult, if you tell a child, like, your Uncle Joe has cancer, cancer is a sickness, and we're worried about him. A child might infer that it's a contagious disease and be worried about catching it, or worried about their parents catching it. You might say, but why would they think that cancer is contagious? Well, because they've heard it's a disease, and that's what they've heard about diseases, and they're generalizing it in this new direction, which makes a lot of sense. But the adult is thinking, well, of course you're not going to catch cancer. So these are the kind of things that you get sort of in both directions of underestimating and overestimating children's knowledge.
Like they think like, oh, catching a cold is contagious and it's a disease, so this is also contagious.
Right, and you see a lot of generalizations like this in children that aren't accurate, but makes sense if you sort of think about it from their perspective and what knowledge they do have.
Right. We need to stop assuming that kids know some things that are common sense to us.
Exactly.
We talked about the honesty with the Chinese kids and the Canadian kids, and then interpreting it differently with modesty and stuff. So I had a question about how reputation plays a role in children's behavior.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We're just starting to figure it out. So I think maybe 15 years ago, people thought, well, teenagers are really concerned with their reputation, which they are, but they're like younger kids, they don't really care. And now there's just a lot of research showing that even preschool children are doing things to try to enhance their reputation, to enhance their status, to be seen as smart or nice, whatever they think will be rewarded or make people think well of them. And so we're really interested in sort of how that emerges and what kind of reputations they're thinking about and how they might care about different things for different audiences. So you might care in a classroom, a child might face the challenge, like they really want to make their peers laugh, but they want the teacher to think they're smart, and they're like, how do I kind of navigate that?
They need to please both groups and they don't know how to do it at the same time.
Right. Yeah, sometimes that's hard.
That is really hard. I was gonna say, honestly,
and politicians try to do this, right? They're trying to talk to one audience, but then they know that another audience might think about it differently.
Right. I was gonna ask you in terms of students, like for psychology students who are interested in research, like what skills are essential for them?
Do you mean that they get in research, or before they go into to get into research, or what do you mean?
Okay, let's start off with getting into research. What skills?
Okay, so that is different for almost every lab. So how it works here is that each lab is kind of its own sort of almost like a company where they all sort of are figuring out the research they do, and they have different needs. So in my lab, for example, we need people who can help recruit families, because one of the hardest things in our research is actually to recruit participants to be involved in these studies. And so that's one of the kinds of things that we need. But it's different in some labs. Some labs, computer programming is the most important thing. Psychology is a huge field. That's one thing people don't get, like how big it is. Almost every topic intersects with psychology. And so people are just doing such different kinds of things.
So it all depends on the lab that you want to get into and the skills.
Right. And then even in our lab, what skills you develop, there's some common skills, like how do you think about research questions? How do you find articles that are relevant to the topic you're looking at? How do you think about how to analyze data and show what it looks like? All these kinds of things you're going to see in most labs, but some of the specifics depend on what kind of project we're working on at the moment.
Okay, so then in your lab, what does it take to design a good developmental study?
So designing a good developmental study usually honestly takes years.
Wow.
And I think that's a misconception. People think, oh, well, I read this study and it's so interesting, I could do that. It's like writing a Dr. Seuss book. People read it and they're like, this is so easy, I could write just like that. But it actually, doing an elegant study, it takes a lot of experience and feedback. And so I just think very few people get into it and kind of do it right away, because you learn through doing, and that's I think a lot of life is like that too. I think that's why it's the classroom learning is great, but you sort of want to connect it to how you actually try to do things in the world.
So more hands-on, right?
Hands-on and connecting it to sort of the theories and what you learn about in class. And because as you do it, you're like, oh, but this was supposed to, this was supposed to work. This was supposed to make sense, but there was this problem I never knew about. I've been doing this for so long, and every study I do, I run into a new kind of problem that I haven't seen before. Wow. But it's great if you think of it as a learning experience, because every new kind of problem you have, you're like, okay, well now this has helped me think about the kinds of things that can happen with research.
It's always a learning opportunity, right?
It is, and I think that treating life as a learning opportunity is kind of a good attitude and sort of related to my background in achievement motivation and even the frustrations, even the bad experiences. Now, it doesn't mean it's okay to just tell someone who has a really bad experience, oh, it's a great learning experience. It's very dismissive and not really treating them seriously. But for yourself, assuming it isn't like a real horrible thing that happened to you, I think most of the things, like if you're in a lab and you don't like it and you think it's boring, can say, okay, well, this is helping me learn what I don't want to do, which is also important, right?
Right, yeah. So it's all about the mindset.
Exactly. Exactly.
Awesome. So then you're telling me you were doing this for a long time, and you probably had interactions with a lot of students. Like, what is one misconception that like students usually have about developmental psychology?
I think the biggest misconception is that it's easy, because they're like, a lot of people are like, I love kids, so I don't have to work too hard at this. I just kind of know what kids are like. But it is there's just, even if you're really good with kids, and it helps a lot when you're testing children to be good with kids, but it is like still really, the theories can be complicated, and how do you translate the theory into an actual research question that you can answer and understand? There's just, it seems easier than it is. And I think the same thing for clinical psychology. Actually, I know a lot of students are interested in it, and I hear from a lot of students who say, oh, my friends tell me I'm so good at helping them, so I want to be a clinical psychologist. And I'm like, well, when you're actually doing clinical practice, it can be tricky in lots of ways other than beyond the kinds of things you might help your friends with. Yeah.
Do you have an example of like a tricky situation?
Well, a lot of times if your friend, so much of being able to help someone is them wanting help. And, in clinical situations, you might have to deal with someone who doesn't really want to be there. It's very much like, someone's making them go, and they really don't want to, and they're dragging their feet, and you have to be able to deal with all these kinds of situations. Yeah.
Wow, that's true. You really can't help someone unless they want to help themselves.
It's pretty hard if they're not on board for wanting to change, and you're trying to drag them through changes. Yeah.
So then, can I ask if you have kids of your own?
I do have children of my own. Yeah.
And did you use your research as they grew? Like, did you use it to help your raising them?
Well, to some extent, and to some extent not, because one of the things I've learned by having children is, before I had children, I was much more confident about that parents had all this influence, and then I realized temperament is very important. So the children's sort of inborn personality tendencies and everything, and my children were the kind of kids who would say things like, you're a developmental psychologist, so how come you can't get me to do anything you want? So that was kind of the personalities that I sometimes had. So yeah.
That's funny. Do you think kids are born with personality?
Oh yeah. Oh, the research is pretty clear. It doesn't mean you can't change, but I think of it as like you get a little push from nature, and it's kind of like your path of least resistance. But there's lots of studies on temperament and showing like some kids are temperamentally shy, and it's super interesting. Like if you watch children, there's some children, regardless of what anyone does around them, that are just like, they see something dangerous, like they're up high on a slide, and they're just like, I'm afraid to go down. And then you see other children who are just barreling right down and totally unafraid, and a lot of that comes from genetics.
Wow, that's new information to me. So you think like it passes down generationally, like for like personality wise? You can get your like grandparents' personality?
Well, I mean, genetics, of course, you have lots of mixing and matching of different things, but absolutely there's no question that many personality traits have a genetic component. Now, again, it doesn't mean like, oh, I've always been shy, so that means I can't change. It doesn't mean you can't change, but it's kind of like this little push from nature, and it makes some people it's just like a huge, big deal for them to do something a little risky, and other people it's just sort of, they don't even have to think about it and they do it. So.
Wow.
And also, a lot of people who study temperament study emotions, and some children just, from very, very early on are laughing all the time and just so happy, and other children are just really, really sad, and it's just, these are things that I think people often blame. That's another developmental psychology myth. People often think, well, if your child's happy, you must be the greatest parent ever. If your child's sad, you must be, and I really worry about those kind of things, because it seems like these are babies,
Yeah.
How could they be born with these characteristics? And yeah, I mean, that's one of the advances in our field, is to show how these temperament and these genetic factors affect development. Yeah.
That's really interesting. What's your favorite class that you've taught ICSD so far?
What's my favorite class that I've taught? So I haven't taught like that many different classes. And some of it is, my main class I teach is Psych 101, which is developmental psychology, which I like teaching. It's a very big class though, so it's the thing that I don't like so much about it is it's hard to get to know a lot of students when you're teaching hundreds and hundreds of students. So, but the smaller classes I teach are part of the honors program, and so one of the classes I teach is a class where different researchers come in and talk about what they do, and I love it because I get to be a student again, and I think, for people who are done being students, like maybe as a student it's hard to appreciate because you're stressed about so many things, you don't know about the future, and it's hard. But for me, I'm like, I get to be a student again. Yay, I'm one of these nerdy people that will just like go to lectures for fun all the time. I love being on a campus on totally topics even that have nothing to do with my research. Yeah.
So I want to ask, what advice would you give students that are wanting to get closer to the professors on a personal level?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard at a place like UCSD where there's so many students, but it also is the case that not that many students come to office hours, and a lot of students only come to office hours when they have a specific question about an exam or the content. And I think office hours, using them to get to know your professor and ask them about their research. Everyone here anyway is super excited about their research, so if you ask them about it, that's surprisingly few people do ask questions about it. So if you read a few abstracts about it and then say, oh, how did you get interested in this topic, then that's a good way to get started. Yeah.
Do you have a student like that sticks out to you, like in your memory?
I mean, it's hard to say. I definitely have students who like I've kept in touch with for years and years and years, and that's actually a nice thing too. I love it when students, I do a thing in my class where I say, after the 5-year challenge, where I say, after 5 years, like write me and tell me what you're doing, and I have some students do that, and then we it's fun, we stay in touch, and then I have those students mentor other students, and I love having sort of that network and connecting students to other students, and I think that's kind of cool too. Like, I think a lot of students should ask their professors, like, if they're interested in a field, if they know anyone who went into it, because I think it's super cool to be able to create these win-win situations, and it's also connect people who are, and also those students, it's meaningful for them to help UCSD students later. So I really like that.
I wish more professors would do that. I feel like that's so meaningful. It's such a good way to use you as like a professor, connecting other students.
And that's an advantage of being older, is I know a lot of people and have kept in touch with people, and so students like, oh, I want to be a genetic counselor. I'm like, I know a student who's a genetic counselor now, so you can find out if that's a good path for you.
That's right. I wanted to ask you, what is one general advice you would give your students? Just general.
Yeah. So this is not exactly a student advice, although I could give study tip advice, because that's a whole other thing. But one thing that I did that I really appreciate that I did is interviews older people in my life. So back in 1992, I interviewed my grandmother, who is, died not that many years after that, but it's just so precious to me to have this interview and having her talk about her life and just ask questions about that. So I think that's something that doesn't take that much time, and I think my whole extended family really appreciates having it, and I think it's something pretty easy people can do.
I'm gonna do this weekend. That's my weekend plans for this week.
But be sure to save it in a way that for the future. That's one of the tricky things, because if you save it in file formats, change over time, so you have to kind of
you have to do it where it's like doesn't matter the time.
Or keep your eye on the file format change and make sure your computer can still read it 10 years from now because everything's changing. That's one thing.
True.
Yeah.
Do you think a video would work?
Yeah, you might have to talk to someone actually I had it on these old cassette tapes and someone knew how to transfer it from that to audio.
That's so nice.
Digital, maybe it's okay with digital.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll do like printing videos in the future. You never know. But now I'm gonna transition into our office hours with Aya, and we're gonna play a game called Younger or Older Children. And I'm gonna give you a scenario. It's gonna be you having to tell me if this child, the behavior or thinking is from an older child or a younger child. And there's no wrong or right answers.
Do I just say the answer or do I explain my answer?
You're gonna say the answer and then you're gonna briefly explain.
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 1. A child says maybe she lied because she didn't want to get into trouble.
Younger children think a lot about getting in trouble. I mean, older children do too, but that's definitely a younger child.
Okay, that's true. Okay, number 2. A child says, or they refuse to share a toy because she didn't share yesterday.
That is younger child too. And again, people care about like what other people are keeping track in relationships. That's super interesting part of reputation, but definitely the way it's said sounds like a young child.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, number 3. A child chooses to sit next to someone who other kids say is mean and is saying, I want to see for myself.
That would be older child.
Oh. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think most children would do it, but I think older children are more likely to sort of look more deeply at is this right or not, and sort of have learned that what people say is not always the reality.
Oh, okay. Number 4. A child says he only helped because the teacher was watching.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that could be either because, although maybe the awareness of it is more common in older children, so I'll say older.
Oh, okay. So the awareness plays
But
a
it
role.
is true, like in our research, in a lot of research, children really do act differently when they know people are watching them.
Wow. So number 5. A child says, I won't tell her a secret because then no one will trust me.
That's an older one, definitely.
That's an older one?
Yeah, thinking about the relation between secret keeping and trust is sophisticated.
That's crazy. Oh my god. Okay, that brings us to the end of the game, and I wanted to say thank you, Professor Heyman. This was awesome. And for anyone who's interested, where can they find your work?
They can just look it up. I don't know what to say. They can just look it up online.
You have like a website?
Yeah, I mean, all faculty at UCSD have websites, and if you want to look at my articles, you can look up Google Scholar and look at some.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, then thank you so much, Professor Heyman. This has been an amazing conversation, and for anyone watching, if you enjoyed this conversation, follow the podcast, and thank you again, Professor. Okay. We'll see you next time.